So we stop trusting ourselves. We don't learn to discern. We look for false data to justify why we can't trust and why mistrust should rule the day and why we should live with fear and why we should doubt everything.
Call it mental health. Machiavelli's in the corner with a spreadsheet and a grin. Moral disengagement quietly whispers, everybody does it, my friend. And shame says, don't you dare be truly known. They'll leave if they can see. So we build a golden cardboard throne and call it our personality. While every mask gets heavy, every secret sends a bill. You can decorate your internal prison cell and be hiding from guilt still. Why do we lie to look a little
Hey viewers, we're
taller?
picking up the episode
Why do we lie
where
to
we
make
left
others'
off
judgment
in the
feel
last
smaller?
episode,
Why
and
do
hope you
we
enjoyed the
have
continuation of
control
this.
over
So here we go. So weaponizing cognitive load to reveal the truth. So the concept is lying requires intense mental resources to invent a story, suppress the truth, monitor their demeanor, and analyze reactions simultaneously. So there's a lot of work that goes into that. So what we want to try to do is figure out what are ways, if we're really trying to figure out truth telling, what are the things that we can do in ways that we kind of challenge that person who we feel like is lying to us. So ways we tip the scale is, it says reverse order recall is forcing the subject to tell their story backwards disrupts the chronologically prepared script, including within statement errors. So if something happens, we've recorded the sequence of events in our brain. And if then we've told a lie, we really often, a lot of people don't rehearse those very often. So when we have to tell that lie in reverse, then our brain has to work backwards and it has to work even double time. So there's going to often inconsistencies can be found in that. The next one is unanticipated questions. Asking highly specific peripheral questions forces the liar to invent new details on the spot. So that's where then if you're asking deeper questions or more probing questions in the middle of them telling the story, well, what was that person wearing? And somebody who's going to want to tell a lie might come up with a real quick answer. Whether they were in a blue shirt or green shirt, or they might react with anger, or why are you asking me that? Because they're feeling stress. So we want to be aware of the emotions that are told. We want to be aware then of even sometimes where eye gazing is. And, we know sometimes where people are gazing, which directions they're gazing might be if it's visual or auditory. And then we talked about skilled liars sometimes won't do that. They'll maintain direct eye contact. So again, these are things to consider as well. Then we have strategic use of evidence. Withholding known evidence to trap the liar in inconsistencies, forcing a cognitive collapse. So what we want to see there is as we help people in this situation of telling the story, but we're withholding information that we know, we're going to provide that as they then step into the situation where we have facts that they don't have, and then we can understand a little bit more about whether or not they really were telling the truth, and then see how they react when those are revealed, those facts are revealed. Now, the diagnostic matrix, categorizing chronic deception. So what we're looking at here is the difference between compulsive lying, which is habitual, and pathological lying, which is manipulative. So we have the driver first, that's the first factor. Then we have the nature of lies. Next, we have the emotional state. And last, we have behavioral and the neurological profile. So the driver of compulsive lying is anxiety reduction, low self-esteem, deep-seated fear of rejection. So those are some of the three reasons why people tell compulsive lying. It's to cover themselves, to protect themselves, to decrease this anxiety. Remember, the core emotion of anxiety is helplessness. So I feel like I'm helping myself by telling this lie to relieve this thing. And as we talked about, though, the cycle of lies is going to feed that helplessness, because then we sometimes feel helpless to be able to maintain that truth. And what if I forget the lie? What if I forget the story? So that's where it can even lead to more stress, more shame, more guilt, more failure, more anxiety. And remember, the longer we feel helplessness, Do you remember what comes after helplessness? The more we feel helpless, Grace?
I mean, I would say personally worthlessness.
Oh, that's a good one. Yeah, that's a good one. Now, it's helplessness's cousin is, do you remember?
No, you're gonna have to remind me.
Yeah, hopelessness.
Hopeless. Oh, okay.
Yep. So the more we feel helpless, and helplessness is fear-based, that's why I call them the cousins. Hopelessness is pain-based. And you're right, though, what often comes hopeless is worthless. Absolutely. Great answer. So we have now pathological lying, which is manipulative. The driver is power, attention, control, and material gain. So that's linked to antisocial personality disorder and narcissistic personality disorder. So I think we can look around our culture. Everybody can see people who lie manipulatively to get something, and usually to get power, control, attention. And I think we have a lot of people on social media. We have a lot of people in our communities. We have a lot of people on our political system. And like we also talked about before, the more that it's done, the less the amygdala responds. So it kind of gets burned out. So it becomes easier and easier just to tell those lies. And the more that we don't challenge them, and that's where speaking truth to power comes from, the more that people are able just to get away with it and think that it's okay. Therefore, the more other people in culture believe that they can continue to do the same things and they should be able to get away with it. So it feeds that whole culture of lying. And I think that that's a struggle we're in right now, to really seek truth and to walk in our truth. So the nature of the lies. For a compulsive liar, it's often minor, spontaneously reflective, or spontaneous, reflective, and uncalculated. So it just happens in the moment. Somebody gets caught with something, they make up a lie. They want to cover their tracks, cover their tail. Like I said, look better, reduce anxiety. The pathological liar it's elaborate, grandiose, rehearsed, and highly strategic. So they'll think about their lie. They're gonna want to cover their tracks, like we said, before they even get to that situation. And the more they can do that, and the quicker they get at it, the easier that they can continue to do that and almost have different lies rehearsed, to me, almost subconsciously. Emotional states. The compulsive liar experiences guilt and remorse, likely to admit the lie when confronted. So you push a compulsive liar on something, they're more likely to come around in the end and say, okay, I did it. I told the lie, because that anxiety is increased, and the tension is increasing. That fear and the feeling of failure and shame and guilt are increasing. They want to release that pressure. The pathological liar lacks remorse and will aggressively double down when confronted. So again, I think we see that a lot today. People who just continue to double down and double down and double down until other people just give up. And that reinforces that, hey, I won. And that's what we're going to really want to look at, is people just get tired of it. And sometimes other people will come to their rescue, to that pathological liar's rescue, and say, leave them alone. Because we said we want to trust people. So behavioral neurological profile. Liars tell lies even when the truth would suffice perfectly. And pathological liars is a deficit of gray matter. This is really interesting, Grace. I really wanted to see what your thoughts were in understanding the neurophysiological side. So the deficit of gray matter, which is more of that's the part of the brain that we process information in, versus the surplus of white matter, which is the connectivity in the prefrontal cortex. So the gray matter is how we process information. The white matter is what basically helps to connect our brain. That it's the pathways of connection that help create how our different areas of our brain are kind of strung together. So what are your thoughts on? I know you haven't taken necessary physiology or a lot of these deep science courses yet or anything like that, but is that interesting to you to think of how the brain can play a factor in lying?
It all comes down to kind of how your brain is wired and how it works. It's like it's kind of hard to unwire your brain from something like that when your brain is in a state of where you're looking at whatever you will gain.
Mm-hmm. And it's kind of it kind of becomes just this habitual pattern that basically we talk about neural pathways firing, And once our brain gets in a pattern of firing down a certain neural pathway, the way I often explain neural pathways is the idea of, if our brain, the gray matter in our brain and the white matter in our brain is like a field of wheat, and we want to get from one side of that field to the other side of the field. The first time we walk across that field and we look back, we're not even going to be able to tell where we walked. The wheat stands right back up again. And then we might walk back to that direction, to the direction where we came from. And then we walk back and forth on it. The more times we walk that path through that wheat, we're going to step on more of that wheat, and it's going to lay down, and we're going to make a path. Well, create neural pathways. It's like, again, we're finding another pathway through the wheat again. And if that wheat's dewy, and wet from the morning, and we keep getting our pants wet and shoes wet from walking through it, we're going to want to go back to that neural pathway. That's why when people are changing behaviors, it's difficult to change them, because that neural pathway is easy. Whether it's a lie or a certain behavior or an addictive pattern or an emotion, even emotional patterns, they become easy to fall into because our pathways, those neurons, are used to firing in those down those same pathways. So we understand the difficulty of change and rehabilitation. It takes time, it takes energy, it takes willful, voluntary effort for people to really see the pathway to really lasting change in their life. And that's what we're really wanting to help people to see here is, what's the pattern of lying about? Why do people lie? What's the difference between these people? Understanding the people in the society around them and understanding themselves. So question for you, Grace, do you feel like in the people that you've known in your life, you see some who are more compulsive liars and some who are more pathological liars?
I think when I was younger, it was kind of harder to see that, but now, like, as you've grown as an adult, I do believe I have met a lot of people that are compulsive liars. I believe that I've probably been a compulsive liar at times as well, like something that's a habit and is something that I want to break and that I feel ashamed of. Pathological wise, I think when I was younger in middle school, I think I've had a few run-ins with people like that.
Kind of takes you off guard, doesn't it, at that age?
Yeah, a little bit. I think so as well, because,
Yeah.
it's somebody that plays the game a lot better than you do. And so it's hard to win against that. So you kind of always leave the situation feeling kind of like, like, oh, I lost. Like, like, how do I, how am I'm going out of my way. I'm telling the truth about these things, but everybody believes this person who is obviously lying.
And I think a lot of pathological liars are often they can be very gregarious and they relate well. People relate well because they're nice and friendly, and they come across with a smile, and therefore people again want to trust people. Especially adults don't want to believe that kids can lie as well as they can lie, because adults, I think, want to feel like they know better. So adults want to feel like they're right. They want to see kids who want to be seen as good, especially when somebody is so convincing and seems so likable. Adults don't want to be wrong either. It's what that comes down to. And that's what I think happens a lot when kids and teens and through high school and young adulthood are learning to really become better pathological liars. They're just not fully challenged by adults because they just don't want to see it. They don't want to believe it. And it's a struggle to want to see and recognize somebody that might be putting one over on you. That's where cognitive dissonance comes into play. So as we continue, now we're getting into this idea of gaslighting. So that's weaponizing deception. So phase one, as it says here, is the deployment. Pathological liar crafts an elaborate, confident fabrication to manipulate an outcome. So they'll tell a story to somebody, oh, that didn't happen. Or, I know gaslighting's a big term using more and more. And I think the term today is being thrown around excessively. And I think we really want to look at what gaslighting is. And I think it's almost used so someone can play the victim Whereas I think we really want to understand, what can we learn from this, and how can we understand the difference between a lie, a compulsive lie, a pathological lie, just somebody who's trying to get their way, somebody who's really trying to avoid a truth, or somebody who's at this level really working hard at this idea of gaslighting. So phase 2 is the target notices the inconsistency. The target notices the contradiction. The illusion of transparency makes them assume the liar knows they are caught. So there's a knowledge there that says, no, you're not telling the truth. And the liar does not want to be caught at all. So then phase 3 is the reality attack. The liar attacks the target's memory, sanity, or emotional stability with absolute certainty. So they'll be able to retaliate, and they retaliate quickly. Often, what are they trying to do? They're trying to manipulate doubt, fear, embarrassment, guilt, shame, failure, stupid, humiliation. They're trying to manipulate those emotions in that person, even confusion. Remember, confusion says, I need more information. Doubt says, I have more questions. And that person doesn't want there to be more questions, because they know the more questions that are being asked, the more likely that their lie is going to fall down. So phase 4 is the truth default override. The target's desire for harmony overrides their intuition. So even when gut feeling inside says, yeah, this doesn't feel right, they still want to get along, or they still want the conflict to stop. They don't want to feel that tension between them and the other person. They just want it to stop. So then the person often leaves feeling, and this is the core tell, you feel crazy for noticing the red flags. You feel like there must be something wrong with me. Maybe I'm not seeing this accurately. And then we doubt ourselves, and we doubt ourselves, and we doubt ourselves. And that's where then not only do people often not trust others, the bigger issue is that they don't trust themselves. And that's the key to remembering here for each of you out there. Is what I want to teach people to do is learn how to discern. And that's when we learn to trust and feel and know and ask more questions and use data, and then look at the situations and know that if somebody is in that situation where they're continuing to just lie to us and manipulate us, what are our choices to potentially leave that relationship and or to get help or support or therapy, counseling, guidance, to make sure we're not trapped in that situation, and to make sure that we can work towards change. If not for that person, at least for ourselves. And that's a key here. So the dissonance of belief, why we trust known liars. Okay. This is a key piece here. And that's where often people stay in marriages and families and jobs and all these situations that are power-based, even the politicians we might elect and we put in places of power, because we know that something doesn't fit. We often want to believe and trust those people we believe in, because the idea of cognitive dissonance is accepting that a loved one or trusted leader is a pathological manipulator, creates an unbearable psychological tension. Okay. So let me ask you this, Grace. Do you feel like you've had some of this cognitive dissonance in some of your friendships and relationships where you just really wanted to believe somebody so much?
I think in a lot of the relationships I've had and a lot of friendships I've also been a part of, I think I would rather there be, I guess, peace, and I would rather, what somebody's telling me be the absolute truth, because, why would somebody that cares about me lie to me in any way? Why would somebody that I feel like I've been truthful or tried to be truthful to, if they care about me so much, why would they choose to lie to me?
Yeah. Yeah. And that's really, I think, one of the biggest parts there. Somebody says they care about me. Somebody says they love me. Somebody says they want the best for me. Somebody says they're going to make a difference in my life. Yeah, I want to believe that. And that's often, though, where, again, we surrender our power. And it's not about taking our power over them. It's about taking our power and keeping it within us and not looking to other people to save us, to rescue us, to fix us. We live in a world where we can make our life better and the lives of others better, not at the expense of others. So the illusion, next step, illusion of transparency. We falsely believe that internal states are obvious. We assume a liar would look like a liar, ignoring their successful behavioral control. So that's where you think, how could this person that looks so convincing and so truthful be lying to me? That doesn't work. And that is where we really want to start to ask ourselves, look at the data. People will ignore data, absolute, irrefutable data, because they don't want to upset somebody, or they don't want to feel more doubt themselves because they've already bought in and sold themselves on belief A, when belief B might be the truth. So the path of least resistance, it's emotionally safer and less immediately disruptive to accept the lie than to shatter the foundation of the relationship, family, or organization. And that's where a lot of people just are like, it's learned helplessness in some ways too. I just give up. I'll just go along with it. I'll just believe it. Rationalization, justification, minimization, denial. Those are cognitive defenses that go into this whole idea about why we trust known liars. And that's what we want to look at. And that idea of really, we each want to own that. We each have a choice, just like Grace and I talked about before. We each have a choice in the lies we tell and what we choose to believe as well. So what's the collateral damage of deception? The toll of the lie on the liar, the pretender's isolation, a profound inability to be truly known or loved. So yeah, when people lie to protect themselves, and even a pathological liar to get power or to gain favor, they still feel alone inside. And they often feel their relationships can't be genuine. So they protect that, and they might protect that with a shield. Maybe it looks like flippancy, I don't care, or invulnerability or denial, I'm fine. You know, we want to look at those behaviors and realize how lonely people can feel behind there, and how they often have to keep up even the lie to the world in their ideal view of self and the ideal they present to the world, with usually their gaps between their ideal and real. Then we have to look at emotional fatigue, the exhausting cognitive load of maintaining complex falsehoods. How does that affect our health? How does that affect cortisol levels? How does that affect immune function? How does it affect sleep? Pieces like that. Then recycling negativity, a continuous loop of shame, guilt, failure, stupid, unlovable, worthlessness, helplessness, overwhelm. All those emotions are cycling in there again and again and again. And as it says, in that worsening self-worth. So then what's the toll on the target? Neurological threat response. The brain processes chronic betrayal as a predator threat, flooding the body with cortisol and adrenaline. So when we don't trust people, we become really hypervigilant. And when we don't trust a lot of people in the world because we feel the world isn't safe or the world is lying to us, then that creates all this activity that we can see in our brain. And sometimes it's said that people's brains kind of look on fire from all this excess alpha response that can be in there, and all the ability for our brain, and then our emotion centers and our logic centers and our frontal lobe to try to control the environment, and to be able to always feel like it has to look around and be aware of what's going on in the world around us, so that we can be prepared to protect ourselves at a moment's notice. Then we have the erosion of intuition, hypervigilance, insomnia, and complete collapse of interpersonal security. So we stop trusting ourselves. We don't learn to discern. We look for false data to justify why we can't trust, and why mistrust should rule the day, and why we should live with fear, and why we should doubt everything, and why we often feel confused and then overwhelmed. All right, so now here's how we rehabilitate the liar. So step one, curiosity over shame, shifting the internal dialogue, clinically examining the underlying trauma or ADHD, OCD, or other issues that are driving the impulsive defense mechanism, rather than labeling oneself a monster. This is really becoming more accepting. It's finding that kind of that idea of radical acceptance in a way, to look at the self and look at the purpose. Again, shame's telling you that it's time to love yourself again. Guilt's telling you you haven't loved other people and or didn't trust people enough to treat them in a way that was loving, because you were protecting yourself because of your own issues, histories, events, beliefs, attitudes. So we want to develop that curiosity, and I would say with shame. from shame, not over shame. Because remember, Notebook is still going to go back to these hierarchical viewpoints when it comes up with these slides. And the difficult part is I can't edit them. So I'm going to correct the slide in that. Then we have distress tolerance using CBT, cognitive behavioral therapy, and ACT, oh man, acceptance and commitment therapy to endure the intense anxiety of telling the truth without resorting to a deceptive escape hatch. This also is where this idea of emotional algebra is ideal for lie rehabilitation, because it's helping us to see what our emotions are and seeing them differently, and also then helping to look at that emotional specificity, look at our histories and understand what the triggers and stressors are, and looking at our dichotomies of, do we want to be seen as good or bad, right or wrong, strong or weak, so we can feel like we're winning. Remember, it's all about how do we get to the win. So we walk all through those things, and we can really help people who have a hard time with telling the truth to understand the value of truth telling and the value of learning to accept and acknowledge and give themselves grace and forgiveness and understanding. The last one is step 3, dismantling the ego, practicing radical vulnerability, repeatedly experiencing that exposing the authentic, flawed self is fundamentally safer than hiding behind the engineered persona. That's, again, letting our feel self become our real self and putting our ideal self to the side. And that's really hard in a world that we feel continues to reinforce these the lies and the people that lie. And that's what we want to understand, is we have the power to change our cultures. First, we want to work to change ourselves and see the ability to really be truthful and honest. And then reclaiming the reality, the strategies for the target. So validate the threat, recognize that your physical symptoms as being the target of being lied to, which can feel like insomnia, anxiety, helplessness, hopelessness, overwhelm, depression after we feel worn out, learned helplessness, are a valid biological response to emotional manipulation. Trust your gut over their words. So we're learning to discern again. Compassionate boundaries. Understand that you cannot cure their trauma by accepting their lies. Intent does not erase impact. A lot of times people just think, well, I know they have a reason for this. I'll just forgive them again and again and again and keep myself in this situation. That often doesn't help change things. Sometimes people have to lose things to gain healing, to gain growth, to gain themselves back, the true selves inside of them that they've been exiling, that the fragments of self that it's time for them to heal, that they've been hiding inside behind all these lies. And the next thing is nervous system regulation. Utilize targeted anxiety therapy to guide the brain out of that cortisol flood and hypervigilance caused by long-term betrayal. So that's where we're learning how to respond differently to these things by working to retrain the brain. And also, we can do that through things like neurofeedback. We can look at meditation. There are many, many different ways, but it's kind of over time to retrain our brain to respond differently and to ask ourselves those questions, to find those belief systems from that, again, emotional algebra standpoint, to understand what's the equation we have inside that leads to this intense mistrust and all these feelings of betrayal that we might feel in the world. Correct. So what we're working on here is a culture of truth. Truth is not merely the absence of lies. It's a courageous daily practice of vulnerability and psychological endurance. 2, by understanding the evolutionary biology, cognitive mechanics, and trauma responses behind deception, we strip lying of its mystique. And 3, we have the power to rewire our interpersonal ecosystem, choosing to reward authenticity, forgive imperfection, and build environments where the truth is finally safe to speak. And that's one of the things I think when we look at, Grace, do you feel like you live in a world that it feels safe to speak your truth?
No.
And why? What are the biggest factors that lead to that feeling it doesn't feel safe to speak your truth?
I think fear. I think judgment, and probably the art of feeling like other people aren't going to be as honest.
Yeah. And we don't want to feel like we put ourselves out there when others are holding back, because then what will they think of us? And so, yeah, I think you're absolutely right. And that's where I want to say, people say, well, this is just how the human condition is. This is my genetics or whatever, how we're born that way. And I disagree. I think we have the ability always to change. Like Grace said in the beginning, when I asked her about, is lying a choice? She says, yeah, it's always a choice. We might not feel like it's a choice. We want to understand that if this world is going to change and we're going to find our equity in this world and our collective selves in this world to feel better about who we are and how we are and the world that we want to create, then we really want to see the power of finding the strength and courage it takes to live with truth, honor, and integrity, not just today, but work a little bit more towards that every day and accept your perfect imperfection. So any last comments or thoughts, Grace, on this discussion?
I think that no matter what, like just working forward and going forward, trying to be better and trying to, be as honest as you can and as honest as you want other people to be to you. I think that's the best next step in figuring out yourself. And I think like even coming from me, I have a lot to learn with that because I still use polite lies or I still use lies in a way of protecting myself and trying to protect other people. And that's not necessarily what's ever going to be fully good for everyone in a scenario. You can't want people to trust you without trusting other people first.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And then to me, without trusting yourself, how can you know who and when to trust, So great input, great insights. Is great to have you on the show again, Grace. I really appreciate you not only being a part of the show, but also being a part of my life, because I think that I see you as one of my greatest teachers. So until next time.
We've been tap dancing with the Nile for miles, but we can build a brighter choir. Truth, honor, integrity, raise it higher and higher. So write what you feel in an honesty journal. What did I fear? What did I fake? Was it arrogance? Was it panic? Was it avoiding more heartache? Stop, take a breath. Observe what's true. Pull back from your story that is trying to drive you. Proceed with courage, with cards on the table. Just tell one clean